West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Well, Donald Trump has filed a statement of organization with the Federal Election Commission announcing the formation of Donald J. Trump for President 2024 committee. The filing says this committee is a principal campaign committee. This is the most desperate filing the Federal Election Commission has ever received. This is the earliest announced presidential candidacy in history. In history. This is announcing more than a year and a half before the very first votes will be cast in any form in Iowa or New Hampshire. This is not about running for president. This is about something else. It is well documented that Donald Trump's first campaign for president was not about becoming president. It was a desperate campaign to increase his fame with no plan or expectation to win anything other than more money as a television performer. Tonight's announcement by Donald Trump that he is a candidate for president again is, like the last time he announced he was running for president, actually about something other than running for president. This is Donald Trump's attempt to run away from prosecutors by running for president. Donald Trump is the very first announced candidate for president in history who is a former president under two federal grand jury criminal investigations and at least one state criminal grand jury investigation in the state of Georgia. That's the candidacy that was announced tonight, the triple grand jury candidacy of Donald Trump. Donald Trump made this announcement at the very moment when the pause is over. The pause is over. There is nothing written in the law about the pause, but it has been a long-standing Justice Department policy to not take any public investigative or prosecutorial actions against a politician during the height of campaign season, which the Justice Department defines as beginning 2 months before Election Day and ending the day after Election Day. That's the pause. And the pause is over. Georgia's Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis observed a similar pause in her criminal investigation of Donald Trump's and others' attempts to falsify the results of the presidential election in Georgia in 2020. Today, District Attorney Fani Willis had Georgia Governor Brian Kemp testify under oath to the special grand jury. The governor's testimony had been delayed during the pause, which is over. Trump White House staffer Cassidy Hutchinson is scheduled to testify tomorrow because the pause is over. She testified to the January 6th committee about Donald Trump's call to Georgia's Secretary of State, trying to convince him to change the vote count in the presidential election.
All I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have.
The pause is over on that phone call today. It's all over. And that's why Donald Trump ran up to a microphone tonight to desperately announce a candidacy 2 years before an election, the earliest announcement of a presidential candidacy in history, because Donald Trump is being pursued by grand juries. And he is hoping that becoming a candidate will inhibit or prevent Attorney General Merrick Garland from charging Donald Trump with a crime. That is Donald Trump's gamble tonight in announcing a presidential candidacy. Also today, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals announced that it will hear arguments in the appropriately titled case of Donald J. Trump versus United States of America. The Justice Department is appealing the appointment of a special master to oversee the review of documents seized by an FBI search warrant from Donald Trump's Florida residence. The Justice Department has already been successful in all of its appeals to the 11th Circuit to exclude classified documents from the special master's review. And now the Justice Department is asking the appeals court to simply shut down the whole master process completely. On Monday, briefs filed with Special Master Raymond Dearie by both the Justice Department and Donald Trump's legal team were partially unsealed and revealed a lot. The Justice Department filing said that Donald Trump is actually trying to claim executive privilege and a personal privilege at the same time, trying to claim executive privilege for documents that he's also claiming are personal documents. The Justice Department filing says, seeming to recognize that a document cannot both be a personal record and be shielded by executive privilege, plaintiff Trump has indicated that he asserts executive privilege only if the special master rejects his assertion that a document is a personal record and determines that it is a presidential record. That is a shell game, and the special master should not indulge it. In the Trump lawyers' filing, a new defense of Donald Trump has emerged in the case. This is a completely new defense, formally stated defense in writing, saying that the very fact that Donald Trump possessed the documents means that they were, by Donald Trump's definition, personal documents. It also means that they were, by Donald Trump's definition, automatically declassified simply by his choice to possess them and bring them home. The Trump lawyers wrote, "It is the president's designation, not the appearance or content of a given document, that is determinative. President Trump need not put forth documentary evidence of his designation decisions because his conduct unequivocally confirmed that he was treating the materials in question as personal records rather than presidential records. President Trump's classification decision between presidential and personal was made through action. His decision not to supply the records to the National Archives confirms that he treated them as personal records." And to reiterate, President Trump took this course of action while he was in office. And so there you have it tonight. There's the Trump automatic declassification system described in writing by lawyers for the first time. If, while Donald Trump was president, he said, put those classified documents in that box right over there and send that to Florida, that meant that those documents in that instant were automatically declassified.
It is Wednesday, the 16th of November of 2022. And you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. And you know the tagline. It's, those meddlesome priests. Will no one rid us of them? No one? Well, and the meddlesome pastors, too. Boy, put those together. Tear down that wall of separation. I guess they have. All right, well, how are you? It looks like we have survived the possibility of World War III. Do not be firing missiles into Poland, even by accident. And I'm looking at you, Ukraine, okay? Yeah, it looks like it might have been a foobar on their side. It may not, I don't know. One of the stories, yeah, one of the assessments I came across is that it was anti-aircraft missilery, that debris fell over on the Polish side, but not, I think that there was something else going on there, and somebody plugged in the wrong coordinates, and oops, I guess. All right. I also heard that nearby, the missile did blow up a granary, and that's why they thought it was the Russians, because the Russians will use food as a way of, a lack of food as a way of terrorizing people. Anyway, I also heard that there was some sort of major communication hub around that area that maybe they were trying to hit, and not on the Polish side, but near that border area, and that may have been the issue, is that they were trying to hit that communication hub, the Russian communication hub, and somebody made a mistake. And that's how world wars start. And would it be World War III or is it World War V? I can't keep track anymore. Seems like we've had a couple of world wars since World War II, doesn't it? Have we ever had lasting peace, ever as a species? I wonder. Maybe not. Well, I guess since we're army ants, why can't we be honeybees? Yeah, why can't we? Well, I'll tell you why, because we have an absolute long read on all of these offerings here at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. But I do want to mention a little bit at the top there about Lawrence speaking about Trump wrongly thinking that, he's going to be shielded from any criminal indictments while he's a candidate 2 years out. No president has ever done that. Well, no. And Trump thinks that's a good thing. Yeah, let's see. Does he have the stamina for it, though? Without Adderall or whatever it is that they give him to keep him going. That has a debilitating effect on people. Can you tell? Jeez. My God. What gets me is that there are some people that absolutely believe that's the symbol of virility. And I'm like, oh, my God. Jeez. On the other hand, then you got these steroid-addled, buff, bearded fellows riding around on their Harleys, and you're wondering, what the heck? My God. Talk about furries. Yeah. There ain't no furries except what's riding on all them Harleys. It's scary when you think about it. And it is. I'm not kidding. So, yes, we do have somewhat of a long read on these offerings, and I could go on, but Trump, I don't think, is in a very strong position at the moment. The criminal and civil trials do proceed. Now, of course, he's going to use that as part of his grievance defense. I love how I think it was during his announcement, because I didn't watch it. I just read about it and saw little clips on Twitter like everybody does, or should. That's all you need to know. Well, I don't know. It used to be better when it was, I don't know, like the Wild West, I guess. now that it's under the thumb of Ellen. Or is it Elon? We'll call him Elon for now. Ellen. I like Ellen. But Musk, now that it's under the thumb of Musk. Yeah, that absolutist free speech. I'll tell you he's absolutist about free speech. He's absolutely anybody who says anything bad about me, you're out of here. Cancel this. So we have somewhat of an issue here with this guy because already we have Rudy, who investigators are not going to charge with anything. All right. He didn't do anything that was a crime. I guess that, being a mobbed up DA from New York, that it must help. I thought he was supposed to get rid of the mob. Oh, he got rid of the parts of the mob that was impinging upon the mob that he was with. Maybe that's what it was all about. Maybe that's what it's all about right now, and it sure feels like it, doesn't it? Boy. What is this movie going to be called? We already got Goodfellas. It's got to be called something else. I don't know. Rat Fuckers. Maybe it should be called that. Well, as I mentioned, we do have some longer reads, so I'm just going to forego the rant about separation of powers, a separate justice system for you, me, and they. Because they sure do seem to get away with it a lot. Maybe that's why they, in a way, are, they rhyme. Anyway, enough of that. We shall give you a rundown of what we have in store for you in the Bistro Cafe part, because we still have the chef's table, so stay tuned. But a comprehensive report found new officer training presents an immediate crisis for policing. I would say it's so immediate, it's that's been an issue for decades. Yes, it is. A bipartisan Senate report detailed aggressive and unethical medical mistreatment of women immigration detainees at ICE facilities. And Trump holdovers at DHS are mostly responsible for blocking vital research on domestic threats. Fancy that. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where a convicted French Holocaust denier has been arrested in Scotland after a 2-year search. And Britain's polar research ship is preparing for its second voyage to Antarctica to investigate sea level rises and threats to marine biodiversity. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. At netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the left of the chat room link there near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, across the page is the link to our Patreon page. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio and possibly send us what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink, even in these inflationary times, if you could afford that, to send us that once a month, it really does help us pay our bills. And all kidding aside, thank you for your generosity to those of you who have been helping us out. It really does help, so thank you. And thank you to those of you who in the future may consider to do so in this time of need. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, while we still have Twitter, you can at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that, and thanks, Tom, for doing so. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. Now, you should know that I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Kos 10 minutes before showtime. And you can access that by looking at my Twitter feed because it'll be there. The links will be there to take you to that Daily Kos page, and there they are. And as you also know, you can find the real reportage and the real articles. If you would like to follow the show on Twitter, do so at Cookbook West. And please do pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. And the deep archive of the Netroots Radio Library over all these many years can be found at the Internet Archive at archive.org. As long as they don't burn down the Library of Alexandria, they'll be there. This first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays, is by Mark Berman of the Washington Post. Public outrage over how police use force has fueled protests in the streets, spurred calls to cut their funding, and ignited broad debates over how to reform law enforcement. Despite this intense focus on the present and future of policing, one key component has remained woefully inadequate, according to a report from a prominent policing think tank. How new officers are trained. Training for recruits, quote, presents an immediate crisis for policing, end quote, according to the report from the Police Executive Research Forum, otherwise known as PERF, a copy of which was provided to the Post before its scheduled release on Monday. The report describes a system that, even after years of push and pull over change, is built to train officers quickly and cheaply. So that's why they drag them out of the military, because they already know how to shoot up a square full of civilians. I wanted to know. Now, that system then hurries the new officers onto streets across the United States without helping them develop vital skills, including crisis intervention and communication, that they will need on the job, according to the report. Police nationwide have faced criticism how officers use force with unrest and protest following cases in Cleveland, New York, Baton Rouge, Louisville, Atlanta, and Ferguson, Missouri, among other places. Yeah, lots of other places. The new analysis of training is based in part on a survey of hundreds of law enforcement leaders conducted in 2020. During a period that encompassed the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic, the death of George Floyd, and the ensuing wave of nationwide protests against police brutality amid a broader racial reckoning. Now, policing has changed over the years, seizing on new technologies and adopting approaches including community policing, the report said, while officers are facing difficult challenges, among them increasingly powerful guns on the streets and people in crisis. But far too often, the report said, police are trained to be warriors, even though their agencies and communities expect them also to be guardians, social workers, and community partners. Changing American policing, the report said, means starting with how new officers are instructed and embracing new approaches instead of holding on to outdated concepts. Do I think it's changed in some places? Yes, Chuck Wexler, the executive director of PERF, said of police training. But do I think there's been fundamental changes since the George Floyd murder? No. In a Washington Post ABC News poll last year, more than half of respondents said they doubted police were adequately trained to avoid using excessive force. The new PERF report and some law enforcement experts say that training has improved in some ways, including an increase in how much time police are instructed, but that overall practices have not changed dramatically, owing to a combination of factors including a reliance on past practices and inertia. Much like policing itself, which is scattered among more than the 15,000 local departments and sheriff's offices, most of them small agencies, training varies from place to place with different requirements and obligations. State commissions typically set their own standards for training, the report said, creating vast differences between the academies in different states, including how many hours they teach and the material presented. There are an estimated 700 or 800 police training academies nationwide, according to the PERF report, so recruit training is splintered and inconsistent. The report said nearly half of the academies are operated by colleges or technical schools, while a third are operated by local law enforcement agencies themselves. In Dallas, the police academy lasts 9 months and offers courses in interview techniques, asset forfeiture, and foot pursuits. After the academy, the new officers spend 6 months in field training. Miami police undergo a 6-month police academy program, while in Oklahoma, the 28-week police academy includes instruction on constitutional law. Wow, in 28 weeks. Self-defense and de-escalation before recruits spend 4 to 6 months dispatched to field training. In Atlanta, potential recruits are warned that the police academy could pose the most challenging academic, emotional, physical, and psychological undertaking you have ever experienced. The PERF report said police academies often devote a lot of time to preparing officers for dangerous encounters, including with armed people. While that is critically important, the report said, it is also vital for officers to learn skills such as how to communicate and engage with the community, things they will need day in and day out for the routine encounters that will occupy the vast majority of their time. The report included other recommendations, such as calling for a set of national standards and for departments to devote more money to training, which accounted for a fraction of the police budgets among agencies that responded to PERF's survey. The report also calls for recruits to be taught more about the history of policing nationwide and locally, with special emphasis on racial justice issues, saying recruits need to learn how this history can shape perceptions of the police today. Police instruction has changed over time, including the increase in hours spent in training, the report said. But that volume of training still falls short when compared with people in other jobs in the United States or police in other countries, the report said. Police in the United States typically spend about 20 weeks in the academy, while recruits in Japan might spend up to 21 months training. Their peers in many European countries, though, spend 2 to 3 years training. Bria Sacchetti and Nick Miroff of the Washington Post brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Women held at a privately run immigration jail in Georgia were subjected to unnecessary gynecological procedures, and Immigration and Customs Enforcement authorities did not halt a years-long pattern of what medical experts called aggressive and unethical treatment, according to a report published yesterday, Tuesday, by a bipartisan Senate panel. The 108-page report, the result of an 18-month investigation, examined claims made by immigrant advocates and a whistleblower, Dawn Wooten, who worked as a nurse at the Irwin County Detention Center in rural Georgia. The inquiry did not substantiate claims that women at the facility operated by the for-profit company LaSalle Corrections had been subjected to mass hysterectomies, as advocates initially claimed, but the investigation found that Georgia physician Mahendra Amin appeared to have performed excessive, invasive, and often unnecessary gynecological procedures on dozens of women detained for deportation proceedings between 2017 and 2020. Neither ICE nor LaSalle Corrections took action until 2020, after the whistleblower came forward, the report said. Our findings are deeply disturbing, Senator John Ossoff, chair of the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee's Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, said at the hearing yesterday, Tuesday, denouncing what he called a catastrophic failure by the federal government to respect basic human rights. Ossoff said Amin scheduled surgeries when less invasive options were available, performed unnecessary injections and treatments, and often proceeded without the patient's informed consent. Is it safe? Senator Ron Johnson, the ranking Republican on the subcommittee, and other GOP lawmakers were not at the hearing, but Johnson's name was on the report, and Ossoff thanked him and his staff for their work on the investigation. An alum of the Washington Post brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. As bloody hate-fueled attacks rose in 2019, Homeland Security officials pledged to step up the response to domestic terrorism, funding in-depth research that would help them understand the scale of the problem. Accurate nationwide statistics will better position DHS to protect communities from these threats, the department said in a strategy report. Now, more than 2 years later, that data collection has not begun, and $10 million languishes unused because of internal disputes over privacy protocols, according to researchers and an official of the Department of Homeland Security. Academics who received DHS contracts say their projects to study violent attacks and extremist movements have been delayed, some effectively scrapped, because of an endless loop of privacy concerns that typically would not apply to work based on open source records, unclassified material such as news reports. In interviews, researchers described the roadblocks they have faced as crazy town, mind-boggling, and beyond logic. Their accounts were confirmed by a DHS official who spoke on the condition of anonymity to freely describe a sensitive internal debate. The official said around 20 research projects funded by Homeland Security faced varying degrees of delays because of rulings by the DHS's Privacy Office that deemed them high risk, even after researchers repeatedly explained that the information they intended to use was widely available to the public. At least $2 million of funding has been returned unused. $10 million more is essentially frozen unless privacy officers approve the research. After so many months of paralysis, the official said, DHS relations with top terrorism scholars have soured, and DHS leaders are left with a gap in data, just as national attention is again focused on political violence, which is at the root of the ongoing trials in the attack on the U.S. Capitol on January 6 of 2021, the recent assault of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband, Paul Pelosi, and far-right threats around the midterm elections. Now let me jump in. The Privacy Office. What do we know about the Privacy Office? Yes, we do know it was been stacked by Trump appointees, and they are still there. I guess you would call them embedded. Now, those issues are not the ones about the embedded Trumpies in the Privacy Office, but the issues of these far-right threats are likely to come up this week as Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas makes public appearances to address the government's response to violent extremism, and he already has suffered one assault by these maggots ready to take over the House. So we know exactly how they're going to address right-wing extremism. They're going to pretend it doesn't exist while people die from it. In June of 2021, the need for more research was spelled out in the country's first national strategy for countering domestic terrorism, which noted that understanding the threat requires facilitating a systematic provision of information and data. You know your enemy. So far, that information gathering work has not been carried out, and that's the feature, not a bug. Right now, if the Secretary of Homeland Security turns to us and says, last year, how many serious attacks based on ideology or grievance happened? We cannot answer those fundamental questions, the DHS official said. We just don't know. Within the department, the official speaking said one view is that privacy officers are trying to shield Mayorkas from potentially controversial research at a time when federal agencies are criticized by both major political parties for their response to political violence. Republicans in Congress have portrayed the effort to investigate domestic terrorism as a thought police exercise that infringes on First Amendment rights. And DHS is already under scrutiny because of the rollback of plans to fight disinformation and for reports that authorities sought dossiers on protesters in Portland, Oregon, indications of how easily counterterrorism work can be politicized. The academic researchers on contract with DHS said they share those concerns, stressing that the recent transgressions make it awkward to push back on privacy oversight, but the researchers say that in long Zoom meetings and months of correspondence with DHS, they have explained that their work is different. It is governed by a code of ethics, reviewed by their universities, and built from data that is already available to the public. The contracts come from the Innovation-Focused Science and Technology Directorate inside DHS, not the enforcement side. Nevertheless, researchers said, DHS privacy officers have ruled that collecting and analyzing public information is too risky. You mean exposing right-wing extremism? It's going to be equally or more controversial that we're doing nothing, that we're not doing our jobs, understanding these problems, how to describe them, or how to respond to them, the DHS official said. In one example of a stalled project, a University of Maryland terrorism research team was awarded $2.6 million in September of 2020 to build a database of nationwide attacks based on publicly available information, essentially a digital repository of newspaper clippings. Researchers would then analyze the data to determine trends such as methods of attack or motivations for attacks. Like in 3 Days of the Condor. That project was deemed by DHS privacy officers to be a high-risk information gathering report, and the 14-month contract ran out in January without a scrap of data collected, according to lead researcher Aaron Miller, who provided corroborating emails from DHS. In September, the university returned $1.25 million of unused funds to DHS. Her team has another contract proposal pending and expects to hit the same wall. All right, let us now go to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. This week, privilege. There's plenty about that in the more usual sense in James Gray's latest, Armageddon Time, which I'll get to. But consider for a moment director's privilege. There's no rule saying that important directors' early lives are necessarily more interesting than those of the rest of us, but they sure get made into movies more often. The respect we have for these folks stems from their ability to weave a story. So what could be more bankable, literally, in Hollywood than a successful director doing his or her own coming-of-age story? Think Lady Bird, last year's Saccharine Belfast, or Licorice Pizza, though that was based on the story of an industry friend of a big director. Armageddon Time is a several-month slice of the life of New York Jewish-American sixth grader, stand-in Paul Graff, growing up in the just pre-Reagan era. In fact, the movie takes its name from a dumb comment made in an interview with Reagan and is suffused start to finish with snippets of the Clash's cover of Armageddon Time. Paul lives with the aspirational dreams of his family, which he does not share, before he's jerked out of public school for hijinks undertaken with an African-American friend, Johnny, and sent to a private school, which sports as two of its funders, Fred and Marianne Trump, who actually speak, as if their presence doesn't say it all. Paul's parents despise Reagan and, despite being fine-tuned to anti-Semitism, are pretty racist themselves, though Paul's dad seems vaguely troubled by an incident starkly portraying what we'd now call white privilege involving his son and the black friend. The cast, including Jeremy Strong, Anne Hathaway, Anthony Hopkins, and especially young Banks Rapetta, lately of The Black Phone, keep Armageddon Time real, even gritty sometimes, and though it flirts with heavy-handedness in his politics, doesn't drown in them. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Christopher Intagliata. Hundreds of miles southeast of New Zealand, you'll find the windswept Bounty and Antipodes Islands. It's there you'll find the breeding grounds of what may be the world's most punk rock penguin, which sports twin bleached blonde mohawks.
So it's like if you took a penguin and you put its flipper in an electricity outlet and it got a shock. That's what you might imagine it looks like.
Lloyd Davis of New Zealand's University of Otago says the erect-crested penguin, as it's known, also has a peculiar breeding strategy. The females lay 2 eggs, but generally leave the first one to die.
They just plop the egg down on the rock, and it's just bizarre to see. And then 40% of them, they just turn their back on it. They don't even attempt to incubate it. They just like, I don't care about that.
Davis says that's unusual because most birds pour resources into the first egg and the second and however many more, but the last egg is almost an afterthought.
The final egg just acts like an insurance policy for them, so that if they lose one of the other eggs, then they can rear the chick from that one. But this is quite the opposite, because in this case, and this is why it's such a conundrum in the biological world, is that they don't favor the first egg, they favor the second one.
Davis and his colleagues traveled to the Antipodes Islands in 1998 to investigate that conundrum. And in reanalyzing their data, they've narrowed down the possible explanations for the behavior. For one, they think the penguins might reject that first egg because it forms while the birds are migrating, so it's smaller, inferior perhaps, to the second, larger egg. And the penguins may also be acknowledging a reality many species face. They simply don't have the resources to raise 2 kids. The results are in the journal PLOS ONE. Davis says when he visited the islands almost 25 years ago, the penguins were the least studied penguins in the world. He says they still are, and now they're endangered.
They seem to have gone down about a third of their population based on the evidence that we have, and yet we know nothing about them. We know nothing about the causes, and we need to do what we can to protect these wonderful and forgotten penguins.
After all, you could say the birds themselves are already putting all of their eggs in one basket. Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Christopher Intagliata.
Wouldn't it be great if life came with a remote control? You know, you could hit pause when you needed to, or hit rewind. Like that time you knocked down that wasp's nest.
Uh-oh.
Or that time you forgot to roll up your windows in the car wash.
Fantastic.
Yeah, a remote control would have come in handy then. Well, life doesn't always give you time to change the outcome, but prediabetes does. With early diagnosis and a few healthy changes like managing your weight, getting active, stopping smoking, and eating healthier, you can stop prediabetes before it leads to type 2 diabetes. It's easy to learn your risk. Take the 1-minute test today at doihaveprediabetes.org. Life doesn't come with a remote control. Yikes! So you're on your own with the wasps. You have the power to take control of prediabetes. Visit doihaveprediabetes.org today. That's doihaveprediabetes.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council and its Prediabetes Awareness Partners.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
Lois Curtis, who early in her life displayed cognitive and developmental issues, had a dream. I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. Lois Curtis's dream, she spent almost 20 of her first 27 years in mental hospitals in Georgia, often sedated, was to live in the community. In 1995, when she was 27, the Atlanta Legal Aid Society filed a civil rights lawsuit seeking the right for her to live outside a mental hospital. She won in the lower federal courts and at the Supreme Court, too. That 1999 decision, Olmstead versus L.C., that's how she was referred to in the court papers, has been described as the Brown versus Board of Education for the rights of persons with disabilities. As the director of the Disability Integration Unit of the Atlanta Legal Aid Society recently said, what changed as a result of the decision? Everything. We have, to a significant degree, transformed from an institutional model to one based on community care. Ms. Curtis eventually moved into her own apartment and became an artist. She presented one of her paintings to President Barack Obama in the Oval Office in 2011. She became a public advocate for persons with disabilities, particularly those still institutionalized. Lois Curtis died from pancreatic cancer on November 3rd at her home in Clarkston, Georgia. She was 55, and we thank her for making life better for all of us. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU, because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1798. That was the day Kentucky became the first state to nullify an act of the United States Congress. The federal government had passed the Alien and Sedition Acts during the presidency of John Adams. These laws were passed as a reaction to the French Revolution and an undeclared naval war with France. These acts had several consequences. They increased the residency requirements requirement for American citizenship from 5 years to 14. They allowed the president to imprison or deport immigrants considered to be dangerous to the peace and safety of the United States. And they effectively limited speech, which was critical of the federal government. Kentucky argued that states had the right to declare unconstitutional any acts of Congress that were not authorized by the Constitution. There was much uproar by other states due to Kentucky's nullification stance. These two acts were eventually allowed to expire a few years later in 1800 and 1801, but they were the forerunner for later federal laws that would be wielded against the labor movement. The Espionage and Sedition Acts, which were passed in 1917 and 1918 during the U.S. involvement in World War I, echoed much of the same spirit of the earlier acts. Under these new laws, in July 1917, nearly 1,200 strikers at the Phelps Dodge copper mine in Arizona, many of them of Mexican descent, were loaded onto railroad cattle cars without food or water and left in the New Mexico desert. In September that same year, the Justice Department staged massive raids on the industrial workers of the World offices, arresting 169 union leaders. In 1918, labor leader Eugene V. Debs was imprisoned for opposing the United States entry into World War I. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon, on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 28 degrees Fahrenheit and quite crusty outside at the moment. Expecting highs in the upper 50s, maybe getting up to the low 60s, winds light and variable. Mostly cloudy throughout the day, though there's plentiful sunshine right at the moment, and we expect more of the same this afternoon. Clear to partly cloudy overnight, lows in the upper 20s, low 30s, winds light and variable, and then mainly cloudy tomorrow with highs in the upper 50s, winds light and variable. We have no pollen that is being registered here in Rogue River itself, though the air quality index for the region is in the moderate range at 60 parts per million. I should mention we continue to be in an air stagnation advisory, which means an inversion layer that holds all the poisons right next to us. The daytime UV index is low at level 1. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 30.51 inches. Visibility is about a mile, and relative humidity is at 86%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 51 degrees and there's lots of rain. Paris is 54 degrees and it has lots of rain. Rome is 66 degrees and they only have light rain. Kyiv is 40 degrees and they also have light rain. Kabul is 36 and clear. Hong Kong is 75 and fair. Tokyo is 52 degrees and clear. Sydney, Australia is 50 degrees and fair. San Francisco, California is 51 and sunny. And New York, New York is 47 degrees Fahrenheit and partly cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. A French Holocaust denier who was convicted under France's anti-Nazi laws has been arrested in Scotland after authorities searched for him for 2 years. Police Scotland said Vincent Reynaud was arrested in Fife, north of Edinburgh, on Thursday on behalf of French authorities, and that he appeared before the Edinburgh Sheriff Court on the same day. Investigators from France's Office for Hate Crimes and Crimes Against Humanity have been working with UK officials to track Reynaud for some time. Age 53, he had been convicted of Holocaust denial, a criminal offense in France, multiple times. His latest conviction was in relation to a series of anti-Semitic posts on social media. He was given a 4-month jail term in November of 2020 and a further 6-month spell in January of 2021. A French judicial official confirmed that France was seeking his extradition, but declined to provide further information. The Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, a British nonprofit, welcomed the arrest and described Reynaud as a despicable Holocaust denier who has repeatedly been convicted by French courts. The charity said he was reportedly living in the UK and working as a private tutor. It said his first Holocaust denial conviction was in 1991 for distributing leaflets denying the existence of gas chambers at the concentration camps.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
And even more Associated Press staff brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Britain's polar research ship is preparing for its second voyage to Antarctica to investigate sea level rises and threats to marine biodiversity. Jane Francis, director of British Antarctic Survey, which operates the ship named after naturalist David Attenborough, said that scientists will study the melting of the West Antarctic ice sheet, how it impacts global sea level rise, and when the Earth goes into irreversible change. If that ice sheet does melt, it holds about 3 to 5 meters of global sea level rise. So what happens in Antarctica won't just stay in Antarctica. It will affect us all, Francis said. The RSS Sir David Attenborough, billed as one of the world's most advanced polar research vessels, completed its maiden voyage in November of 2021. It is scheduled to set sail again on Sunday from Harwich Port in eastern England, carrying around 45 crew members and scientists. Plans call for the ship to reach Rothera Research Station on the Antarctic Peninsula by Christmas and to spend about 6 months in Antarctica, along with delivering food, equipment, and fuel to the British Antarctic Survey's research stations. The mission calls for carrying out trials of polar science equipment and collecting data to understand how climate change is affecting the region and beyond. We need to understand what the water is doing. We need to understand how the air is warming, and we need to understand how the ice is reacting to all of those different factors, Kelly Hogan, a marine geophysicist for the British Antarctic Survey, told reporters during a tour of the vessel yesterday, Tuesday. To do that, we need to measure lots of different parts of the system to get the big picture. And that's why a ship like the David Attenborough is so important, because actually we have all the tools and equipment to do all of those measurements in a state-of-the-art way, she added. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goer. Je voudrais toujours te plaire, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts, dans mon jardin d'hiver. De novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.